Chapter 1: Shadows of the Past. The story begins in the early 20th century, during the height of the Jim Crow era, a time when racial segregation and systemic oppression were deeply ingrained in American society. This chapter introduces multiple African American families living in the Deep South, navigating a world shaped by laws and customs designed to keep them subordinate. From the separation of public facilities to the economic and social restrictions placed upon them, the chapter paints a vivid picture of the injustices faced daily by Black communities. In this era, segregation was enforced through both legal means and violent intimidation. Public spaces were divided. Separate water fountains, bathrooms, schools, and even libraries reinforced the message that Black citizens were not equal to their white counterparts. Signs reading "Whites Only" and "Colored" were commonplace, serving as constant reminders of an enforced racial hierarchy. The chapter follows the daily lives of individuals who, despite these barriers, continued to fight for dignity and opportunity. We meet the Johnson family, a hard-working Black family who faces discrimination at every turn. The father, Samuel Johnson, works as a porter at a local train station, earning far less than his white colleagues, despite performing the same tasks. His wife Clara takes in laundry from wealthy white families, struggling to make ends meet while raising their children. Their eldest son, David, aspires to become a teacher, but the segregated school system offers him little hope. His school is underfunded, with torn textbooks discarded from the white schools. Despite these hardships, the Black community fosters resilience through churches, secret literacy groups, and mutual aid societies. The chapter highlights how these spaces became sanctuaries of hope and defiance. The Johnson family attends a Sunday service where the preacher, Reverend Ellis, delivers a powerful sermon. "The Lord did not make us to bow before man. We shall rise." The congregation nods in agreement, their spirits lifted by words that promise a future of justice, even if that future seems distant. While the Johnsons struggle to survive under segregation, another story unfolds in parallel, that of Sarah Mittel, a domestic worker in a white household. Sarah is subjected to daily humiliations by her employer, Mrs. Whitmore, who refuses to call her by her name, instead addressing her as "girl." Despite being a grown woman with children of her own, Sarah is treated as a child, stripped of respect and agency. She endures the indignities silently, knowing that speaking out could cost her job, or worse, her safety. The chapter also introduces Henry Carter, a Black sharecropper who works tirelessly on a plantation that once enslaved his ancestors. Despite the promise of freedom, Henry finds himself trapped in an economic system that offers no escape. The landowner, Mr. Davis, charges Henry exorbitant fees for tools, seeds, and rent, ensuring that Henry is always in debt. Year after year, Henry's labor enriches the white landowner, while he and his family remain shackled by poverty. The system of sharecropping, designed to replace slavery with another form of economic bondage, leaves Henry feeling hopeless. Yet, resistance exists in quiet but powerful forms. When Sarah Mitchell is finally pushed too far by her employer's cruelty, she begins writing letters to a local activist group advocating for better working conditions. Henry Carter, though unable to own land himself, begins secretly teaching other sharecroppers how to read contracts to prevent them from being cheated. And young David Johnson, despite his school's poor conditions, studies late into the night, determined to rise above the circumstances imposed upon him. This chapter sets the stage for the narratives that follow, emphasizing the resilience and silent defiance of those living under Jim Crow. It reminds readers that oppression did not break the spirit of Black communities. Instead, it fueled their determination to fight for freedom, dignity, and equality. The chapter introduces multiple African American families living in the Deep South, struggling under the weight of segregation laws, from separate water fountains to discriminatory employment practices. The chapter paints a picture of the everyday injustices faced by Black communities. Chapter 2: The Chain Gang. The chapter follows Isaiah Carter, a young Black man from Georgia who dreams of a better life but finds himself ensnared in the brutal system of convict leasing. After being falsely accused of stealing from a local store, Isaiah is swiftly convicted in a sham trial where he is given no opportunity to defend himself. The judge, a white landowner with financial ties to the local industries, sentences him to 5 years of hard labor on a chain gang. On arrival at the labor camp, Isaiah is shackled alongside dozens of other Black men. Their ankles are bound by heavy iron chains, forcing them to move in unison as they march toward their assigned work site. The guards, former Confederate soldiers, bark orders with whips in hand, ensuring that no prisoner forgets their place. The conditions are inhumane. Prisoners are given minimal food, forced to sleep in rat-infested barracks, and subjected to relentless physical abuse. Each day begins before dawn. The men are roused from their wooden bunks, handed pickaxes, and marched into the sweltering heat to break rocks, dig ditches, and lay railroad tracks. Any sign of exhaustion is met with immediate punishment, whippings, extended labor hours, or even solitary confinement in a windowless wooden box. Isaiah quickly learns that there is no sympathy in this place. Only survival matters. Among the prisoners, Isaiah befriends Jacob, an older man who has been on the chain gang for over a decade. Jacob teaches Isaiah how to conserve his strength, avoid unnecessary punishment, and most importantly, keep his spirit from breaking. "They own our bodies, but they can't own our minds," Jacob tells him. The two men form an unspoken pact, looking out for each other in the hellish conditions. As time passes, Isaiah witnesses firsthand the corruption fueling the convict leasing system. The warden profits from sending men to local industries, including coal mines and railroads, where they are worked to death with no chance of freedom. Some prisoners are never released, their sentences extended indefinitely under false charges of insubordination. Isaiah realizes that his only way out is to escape. One stormy night, Isaiah and Jacob make their move. They manage to saw through their shackles using a stolen file and flee into the dense woods. As they run, the guards unleash bloodhounds, their torches flickering in the darkness. Gunshots ring out, and Jacob falls, urging Isaiah to keep going. With tears in his eyes, Isaiah leaves his friend behind, sprinting toward the unknown. After days of running, Isaiah finds refuge in a northern city where a small network of Black activists helps former prisoners. Though physically free, he carries the scars of his past, both on his body and in his soul. Determined to expose the horrors of the chain gang system, Isaiah begins writing about his experiences, ensuring that the world knows the truth about modern-day slavery. This chapter highlights the brutal realities of convict leasing, showing how Black men were systematically criminalized and used as free labor to rebuild the South's economy after the Civil War. Isaiah's story serves as a powerful reminder that the fight for freedom did not end with slavery. It simply evolved into a new form of oppression. This chapter exposes the convict leasing system, a cruel practice where prisoners, mostly black men, were rented out to private companies and forced to work in inhumane conditions. His harrowing experience sheds light on a form of slavery that continued long after abolition. Chapter 3. The School That Wasn't Equal. In the heart of the Jim Crow South, young Ella Mae Johnson, a bright and ambitious black girl, dreams of receiving a proper education. She idolizes teachers and longs to one day become one herself. However, her school, Rosewood Colored School, is a far cry from the well-funded white school just a few miles away. The conditions are appalling: broken wooden desks with carvings from previous generations, crumbling walls, and a chalkboard so worn that the lessons barely stick. The school lacks heating, forcing students to bundle up in coats during winter, while in the summer, the lack of proper ventilation makes learning nearly unbearable. Across town, the Jefferson County White School stands as a stark contrast. It boasts a grand brick building, large windows, a library filled with books, and modern heating. Every student has a brand new textbook, while black children in Rosewood Colored School are left with discarded torn books that still bear the names of white students on the inside cover. Teachers like Miss Abigail Green, a dedicated and passionate black educator, do everything in their power to instill hope in their students despite the lack of resources. She often buys school supplies from her own small salary, knowing that education is one of the few tools black children have to break free from systemic poverty. The inequity is deliberate. State and local governments, controlled by white politicians, allocate significantly fewer funds to black schools, arguing that the resources were better used for white students. The phrase "separate but equal," upheld by the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson, is a cruel lie. Nothing about these schools is equal. Black communities attempt to raise money to improve their schools, but segregation ensures that economic disadvantages persist, making such efforts nearly impossible. Ella Mae, despite her poor school conditions, is determined to learn. She cherishes the moments when Miss Green reads from the only complete history book in the classroom, telling stories of black scholars, inventors, and leaders that white schools refuse to acknowledge. The students listen in awe, their imaginations sparking despite the dim lighting of their classroom. They know that education is their pathway to opportunity, even as the system tries to deny them that chance. The chapter also follows Samuel Davis, an older student who dreams of attending college but faces nearly insurmountable obstacles. Although he is one of the top students at Rosewood Colored School, no nearby colleges accept black applicants. His only option is a historically black college hundreds of miles away, requiring tuition his family cannot afford. He takes on extra work, cleaning stables and delivering newspapers, yet the dream remains distant. Miss Green, seeing his potential, begins writing letters to activist organizations, churches, and black leaders, hoping to secure funding for Samuel. Her efforts symbolize the silent rebellion of black educators who work tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure their students receive a future beyond oppression. Meanwhile, tensions rise as the local white school board threatens to shut down Rosewood Colored School entirely, claiming it is a waste of resources. the black community rallies together, organizing protests and petitions to demand fair funding for their children. Despite the threats, parents refuse to back down, showing the resilience that defines the fight for education under Jim Crow. As the chapter ends, Ella May and her classmates continue to study by candlelight, dreaming of a better future, while Miss Green prepares to meet with activists, knowing that her fight is far from over. The injustices in education under segregation are laid bare, but so is the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to accept inequality without a fight. Chapter 4: Silent Rebellion. In the heart of a segregated southern town in the 1920s, Thomas Richardson, a determined black entrepreneur, dreams of providing his community with a space where they can shop without humiliation or fear. He opens Richardson's Market, a small grocery store offering fresh produce, fair prices, and respect to every black customer who walks through its doors. The store quickly becomes a gathering place, a symbol of dignity and self-reliance, in a world where black Americans are systematically excluded from economic opportunities. However, Richardson's success is seen as a direct challenge to the racial order upheld by white business owners, who rely on black customers while refusing them service with dignity. Almost immediately, Richardson faces resistance. Local white grocers, feeling threatened by his growing customer base, pressure their suppliers to stop providing goods to his store. When that fails, his customers begin receiving anonymous threats warning them not to support a black-owned business. Despite these obstacles, Richardson refuses to close his doors. He finds alternative suppliers willing to risk doing business with him, often black farmers and out-of-town wholesalers. He organizes a community fund, helping other black entrepreneurs invest in their businesses and keep money circulating within the community. His store becomes a hub for discussions about economic empowerment and self-sufficiency, drawing the attention of local civil rights organizers. As Richardson's Market thrives, so does the hostility. One night, a cross is burned on his front lawn, a clear warning from white supremacists that his success will not be tolerated. Shortly after, a group of masked men ransacks the store, smashing windows, overturning shelves, and setting fire to the storage area. The local sheriff dismisses the attack as an unfortunate accident, refusing to investigate. The violence does not break Richardson's spirit. With the help of the community, the store is rebuilt stronger than before. Neighbors donate money, volunteer their time, and stand guard at night to protect what has become a symbol of resistance. Richardson, understanding the power of unity, helps establish a black business cooperative, ensuring that no black-owned business in the town is left vulnerable to financial ruin or violence. The chapter closes with Richardson reflecting on the price of defiance. Though the threats persist, his store stands as a beacon of silent rebellion, proving that economic independence is one of the most powerful forms of resistance against racial oppression. Through determination and collective strength, Richardson and his community refuse to be erased, showing that their fight is about far more than just a grocery store. It is about reclaiming the right to exist and prosper in a world built to keep them down. Chapter 5: The Green Book. In the early 1940s, the Carter family, a hard-working African-American couple, John and Martha, and their 2 young children, embarks on a long-awaited road trip from Mississippi to Chicago to visit relatives. Unlike white travelers who can freely explore highways and rest stops, the Carters must meticulously plan their journey, relying on the Negro Motorist Green Book, a guide that lists safe places where Black travelers can find lodging, food, and fuel without facing harassment or violence. The journey is fraught with challenges. As they pass through sundown towns, small communities where Black people are warned to leave before nightfall, John grips the steering wheel tightly, avoiding eye contact with suspicious white onlookers. Martha, sitting in the passenger seat, clutches the green book, scanning for the next safe stop. The children, sensing their parents' tension, remain unusually quiet in the back seat. At a gas station outside Birmingham, John steps out to fill the tank. The white attendant glares at him, reluctantly pumping the gas while making it clear that no restroom facilities are available for colored people. Humiliated but undeterred, the family presses on, knowing that stopping at the wrong place could cost them their lives. Later, they reach a Black-owned hotel listed in the Green Book, where they are finally met with warmth and hospitality. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, welcomes them with a hot meal and reassures them that they are safe under her roof. The children laugh for the first time that day, playing with other Black families also passing through. Here, they are not outsiders. They are home. The next morning, the Carters continue their journey, encountering racist police officers who pull them over for no reason other than their skin color. John remains composed, knowing that any sudden movement could be fatal. The officer inspects their car, makes a few veiled threats, and finally allows them to go. As they drive away, Martha exhales in relief, but John keeps his eyes on the road, knowing the danger is never truly gone. The Green Book is more than just a guide. It is a lifeline, a testament to Black resilience in an era of legally sanctioned oppression. It represents a hidden network of support built by those who refused to accept a world where travel was a privilege of race. As the Carters finally arrive in Chicago, embraced by family, they reflect on the journey, not just the miles traveled, but the countless struggles faced by Black families who dared to seek freedom on the open road. This chapter highlights the necessity of the Green Book as a survival tool, revealing the resilience, fear, and hope that accompanied every Black traveler navigating a segregated America. Chapter 6: The Lynching Tree. In a quiet town in the Deep South during the 1920s, Isaac Turner, a respected Black farmer, and his teenage son Daniel are caught in the web of a tragic and horrifying event that epitomizes the racial terror of the Jim Crow era. Isaac, known for his hard work and integrity, has always tried to keep his family safe by avoiding conflict with white residents. But in a world governed by racial supremacy, innocence offers no protection. The tragedy begins when Daniel, a bright and ambitious young man, is accused of disrespecting a white woman, a fabricated claim frequently used to justify racial violence. Despite Daniel insisting he merely stepped aside on the sidewalk, the rumor spreads quickly, fueling the town's deep-seated racial animosities. Within hours, a mob forms outside the Turner home, demanding justice. Isaac, realizing the imminent danger, urges his son to flee, but before Daniel can escape, armed men break down the door, dragging both father and son into the night. The sheriff, rather than upholding the law, stands among the mob, allowing vigilante justice to unfold without intervention. The Turners are marched to an old oak tree on the outskirts of town, where a gathering of men, women, and even children watch as if attending a community event. Isaac pleads for his son's life, offering himself in exchange. But mercy is not a consideration. The mob, driven by racial hatred, strings up both father and son, their cries lost in the chaos of shouts and laughter. Photographs are taken, a grim reminder of how lynching was used not just as an act of murder, but as a tool of psychological warfare against black communities. The spectacle serves as a warning. Any black person who steps out of line will meet the same fate. In the days that follow, the Turners' devastated family attempts to reclaim their bodies for burial, but the local authorities refuse, citing mob justice. Their mother, Rebecca, is left alone to grieve, carrying the heavy burden of sorrow and rage. She understands that speaking out could make her the next target, but silence feels like betrayal. Instead, she turns to black journalists and activists, sending letters detailing the truth of what happened. Her words, though met with danger, find their way to national publications, bringing attention to the lynching epidemic plaguing the South. Despite the trauma, the Turner family story does not end in silence. The tragedy becomes a rallying cry for anti-lynching activists, fueling the fight for federal anti-lynching laws that, though resisted by white politicians, eventually gained traction in the civil rights movement decades later. This chapter exposes the horrors of lynching, not only as an act of violence, but as a tool of racial oppression designed to instill fear and suppress black progress. It highlights the courage of those left behind, mothers, widows, and activists who refuse to let the victims of racial terror be forgotten. Chapter 7: The Defiant Vote. In the deep south of the 1950s, a small community of black citizens in Greenwood, Mississippi, embarks on a dangerous but necessary mission to claim their right to vote. Led by Reverend Samuel Carter, a well-respected minister and activist, the group has been organizing for months, educating themselves on the literacy tests and poll taxes designed to suppress black voters. Despite the legal barriers and violent intimidation they face daily, they refuse to surrender their constitutional rights. The chapter opens with Eliza Brown, a widowed mother of 4, gripping a worn copy of the U.S. Constitution as she practices reciting passages, knowing that any mistake during the literacy test will give white registrars an excuse to turn her away. Her son, James Brown, a World War II veteran, stands beside her, determined to vote after fighting for a country that denies him equal rights at home. The local White Citizens Council has already issued warnings, and rumors swirl that the Ku Klux Klan is planning retaliation for anyone attempting to register. On registration day, the group arrives at the county courthouse, dressed in their finest clothes, standing tall, despite the jeering white onlookers and heavily armed police officers blocking the entrance. One by one, they step forward. Reverend Carter is first, presenting his identification. The registrar sneers and shuffles papers before handing him a lengthy, impossible literacy test, filled with obscure legal questions that even educated white citizens would struggle to answer. Nevertheless, Carter remains composed and completes the test to the best of his ability. Eliza Brown steps forward next, placing a small bundle of hard-earned cash on the counter to pay the poll tax, a fee deliberately imposed to disenfranchise black voters. The registrar smirks, flipping through the bills before telling her she is still short on payment. She knows it's a lie, but also knows arguing will only invite more trouble. Despite the setback, she vows to return. As the group leaves the courthouse, they are ambushed by Klansmen in broad daylight. James Brown shields his mother as men in white hoods shove and spit on them. A warning is issued. You come back here again, and you won't be leaving at all. But rather than instilling fear, the attack strengthens their resolve. That night, the community gathers at the church, where Reverend Carter delivers a fiery sermon. They can try to silence us, but they will never erase us. Our voices, our votes will shape the future. The struggle for the ballot box does not end in that courthouse. The chapter follows the group as they seek assistance from civil rights lawyers and national organizations who take their case to federal court. Eventually, their efforts become part of the voting rights movement, leading to national attention and policy change. Though many of them never lived to see it, their fight contributes to the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This chapter illuminates the extraordinary bravery of early black voters who, despite extreme racial terrorism, refused to be silenced. It serves as a testament to the sacrifices made to secure voting rights. Sacrifices that continue to shape the fight for justice and democracy today. Chapter 8: The Music of Resistance. In the midst of racial oppression and segregation, black musicians turned to jazz and blues as a powerful means of self-expression and resistance. This chapter follows Jeremiah J. Turner, a traveling blues musician who uses his songs to tell the stories of injustice, giving a voice to those who have none. From juke joints in Mississippi to smoky clubs in Chicago, his music serves as both a balm for the soul and a rallying cry for change. JT's journey begins in New Orleans, where he learns to play the guitar from his grandfather, a former sharecropper who sings about the pain of lost freedoms and unfulfilled dreams. As a young boy, JT watches musicians on the streets blending African rhythms with European brass instruments, creating the early sounds of jazz and the deep, sorrowful melodies of the blues. He quickly realizes that music is more than entertainment. It is a weapon against oppression, a way to remember, and a means of survival. As JT grows older, he begins to travel across the Jim Crow South, performing in segregated venues where black audiences gather to momentarily escape their struggles. His songs speak of chain gangs, lynchings, voter suppression, and dreams deferred, touching the hearts of those who have lived through these horrors. However, his music also carries a message of hope and resilience, celebrating the strength of black communities that continue to fight for dignity and freedom. While performing in Alabama, JT faces firsthand the dangers of being a black artist, unafraid to speak the truth. One night, after playing a song condemning lynching, he is approached by a group of white men who warn him that his music is stirring up trouble. Later, he narrowly escapes an attack when a local sheriff, angered by his message, tries to have him arrested on false charges. Knowing that his music is both a source of empowerment and a target for repression, JT presses on, refusing to let fear silence him. JT eventually makes his way to Chicago, where he becomes part of the city's thriving blues and jazz scene. There he meets other musicians who have also fled the violence of the South, bringing their stories with them. Together, they create songs that capture the pain of displacement and the longing for justice. His records begin circulating, and before long his music reaches northern civil rights activists, who adopt his songs as anthems for the movement. When the civil rights movement gains momentum in the 1000s, 950s and 60s, JT's music takes on an even greater purpose. His song, "Ain't No Chains Can Hold Me Down" becomes a protest anthem sung by marchers demanding desegregation and voting rights. His legacy continues as younger musicians pick up his work, ensuring that the music of resistance never fades. This chapter showcases how Black musicians, through jazz and blues, transformed personal and collective suffering into a force for change. Their melodies became a testament to the resilience of a people who refused to be silenced, proving that, even in the darkest times, music could inspire, unite, and ignite a revolution. Chapter 9. The Whispered Stories. In a small southern town, Evelyn Carter, an elderly Black woman, sits on her porch, rocking gently in her chair as her grandchildren gather around her feet. Her face, lined with the experiences of nearly a century, holds stories that textbooks will never tell. She has lived through the terrors of segregation, the quiet acts of defiance, and the seismic shifts of the civil rights movement. Now, in the twilight of her life, she ensures that her history, the history of her people, is not lost. Evelyn begins with the stories of her childhood. She recalls the time when she was forced to sit at the back of the bus, how she had to step off the sidewalk when a white man passed, and the humiliation of being denied service at a diner. But beyond the oppression, she also tells of the resilience that thrived in the Black community. She speaks of the underground networks of teachers who educated Black children when public schools failed them, of secret churches that served as meeting places for civil rights leaders, and of her own mother, who risked her job to help organize a bus boycott in their town. She shares the memory of her brother, Henry, who was arrested and sent to a chain gang for a crime he did not commit. She describes the devastation that followed his disappearance and the scars it left on her family. "They took him," she whispers, "and we never saw him again." These painful recollections are not just history to her, they are wounds that never fully healed. As she speaks, Evelyn's grandchildren listen in solemn silence, realizing that the woman they see as their loving grandmother was once a young girl who lived in fear of lynch mobs, a woman who walked miles just to cast a vote, and a fighter who refused to be silenced. She presses into their hands an old, fragile book filled with names, dates, and letters, her own recorded history. "They won't teach you this in school," she says, "so you must teach yourselves." Through her stories, Evelyn preserves the truth that so many have tried to erase. Her whispered tales are not just accounts of the past, they are warnings, lessons, and an inheritance of strength passed down to the next generation. The chapter ends with her eldest grandchild, Marcus, taking the book and promising to continue telling these stories, ensuring that history will never be forgotten. This chapter underscores the significance of oral history, the responsibility of remembering, and the unbreakable chain of storytelling that connects past struggles to future generations. Chapter 10. Breaking the Chains. The final chapter jumps forward to the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, as a new generation of Black activists, inspired by the struggles of their ancestors, fights to dismantle the last remnants of Jim Crow. The streets of Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma become battlegrounds for justice as students, ministers, and everyday citizens risk their lives to demand equality. One of the central figures in this chapter is Clarence Davis, a 22-year-old college student who joins the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, to organize sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. He recalls stories from his grandfather, who was once a sharecropper bound by debt, and his mother, who was denied an education simply because of the color of her skin. For Clarence, this fight is personal. It is about carrying forward the resistance of those who came before him. The chapter follows Clarence and his fellow activists as they march peacefully through the streets, only to be met with police dogs, high-pressure fire hoses, and violent arrests. The brutality shocks the nation, and television cameras capture the unjust beatings of black protesters, finally bringing the horrors of segregation into American living rooms. The voices of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis echo through the movement, inspiring thousands to take action. Meanwhile, in Mississippi, elderly residents like Evelyn Carter, who lived through the darkest days of lynching and voter suppression, now see their grandchildren standing at the forefront of change. Though frail, Evelyn refuses to be left behind. She becomes one of the many black citizens who bravely register to vote despite the risks, walking miles to the courthouse while enduring threats from white supremacists. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 signals a legal end to Jim Crow, but the chapter does not close on a note of complete victory. Instead, it acknowledges that racism and inequality continue beyond the official dismantling of segregation. The fight for economic justice, fair housing, and an end to police brutality remains ongoing. The final pages bring the story full circle, emphasizing that while laws have changed, the struggle for racial equality persists. The young activists of the 1960s pass their stories to future generations, ensuring that the legacy of resistance, courage, and hope endures. This collection of forgotten stories serves as a testament to the resilience of those who lived, resisted, and endured the harsh realities of Jim Crow. Their struggles and triumphs remain vital to history, a reminder that the pursuit of justice is never over.